So now, in comparing their experiences to a close reading of the mental health policy documents, and I'm not going to get into that, those findings in depth here, and I just want to describe more broadly the broad brushstroke findings in relation to that comparison. Not surprising, I'm going to make this assumption that this wouldn't be surprising to all of you here, that the mental health policy documents represent and mirror some of the dynamics that I observed and were reading in the young people's transcripts. And that is, on one hand, the mental health policy documents acknowledge the importance of socioeconomic factors and addressing social determinants of health for young people, and they weren't just focused on young people, but people more generally. But they tended to focus on enabling mental health at the individual and interpersonal level. And this was even when they were addressing, in some of the initiatives in BC, which is where I was looking at, in terms of explicitly addressing social determinants of health, they tend to focus on people with mental illness, severe mental illness, and wrapping intersectoral supports around them in order to reduce costs in the long run, which is the ultimate goal. You can see variously through goal statements and outcome indicators of the policy documents, to enable productivity gains and to support broader capitalist dynamics. There was not an acknowledgement of the need to ensure universal access to resources as foundational mental health promotion strategy that would then in turn enable young people in this case to enable their interrelated mental health needs. So one of the main, so in essence, when you look at the relationship between young people and socioeconomic processes and the contradictory relationship between young people and capitalist socioeconomic dynamics, the mental health policy documents are oriented on one side, encouraging young people and teaching young people generally how to cope with the distress that is evoked by these broader dynamics without an equal attention to addressing the socioeconomic dynamics themselves, which are creating these challenges to young people's mental health needs. So the implications for what I'm referring to as practice-oriented mental health promotion, and I'm using this notion of praxis, which I think needs to be integrated within, to bring in this broader attention not only to exploring how we support young people in relation to individual and interpersonal dynamics, the impact of their parenting and family relationships on their mental health and well-being, but we also need to be bringing an attention to broader socioeconomic dynamics within community life and an explicit attention to that in our assessments with young people in our therapeutic work with them at that one-to-one level. And then we also need to be integrating, considering the challenges that they're facing in meeting their basic need for survival and their lack of ability to engage in broader socio-political action. One implication I think that comes from this work is the importance of integrating socio-political action within our health promotion work. So within group-based health promotion programming, we could be integrating economic literacy training, for example, inviting young people to think about how their broader community dynamics are impacting their mental health and well-being, and engaging them and supporting them to engage in political action, writing letters to their members of parliament, engaging them to think about strategically aligning with other community organizing groups and political action that's happening in their communities, and building alliances and supports between our mental health promotion work and that broader political action to influence these broader dynamics that are influencing their mental health and well-being. And then I think the other element in terms of building that, bringing in a support at the one-to-one therapeutic level where we're assessing and thinking about and helping to normalize the impact of these broader dynamics on their mental health and well-being, and then bringing that up a level to engaging in group-based, praxis-oriented mental health promotion. We then also need to ourselves as healthcare workers advocating for healthy public policy and thinking about policies that will transform these capitalist dynamics in ways that ensure universal access to resources, and assuming that as a universal mental health promotion strategy, and then thinking about the kinds of economic policies that would enable that. So one that is being discussed in Canada and internationally right now is a guaranteed annual income policy, for example, and I think we need to be considering those kinds of policies as a form of mental health promotion at that broader intersectoral level. So here's just a visual depiction of that. I think that also, to go back to the therapeutic work, I think we need to be drawing on critically oriented therapeutic models like narrative therapy or just therapy that's coming out of Australia and New Zealand. Within nursing, we have a relational inquiry model that grounds our assessments within that multi-level assessment process and explicitly attending to broader context and those dynamics and impacting, in this case, youth mental health. I think that is it. Future research, I think we need to be developing programs of research that look at contrasting capitalistic-oriented socioeconomic processes in relation to communally based. So we could be doing interesting research comparing, for example, cooperatively run businesses and those broader dynamics within that organizational context compared to hierarchically corporate models of business, and looking at the impact of those various forms of organizing economically on health, mental health and well-being. And I'll leave it at that. How about, I think I'm probably over, actually. No? Okay. Any questions? I'm still getting used to sharing this.
Don't be shy.
Okay.
Yes. I have a good loud voice.
Okay, yeah.
Along the way toward the end, you mentioned an economic policy that's being considered in Canada, and with the implication it was considered elsewhere also.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear a little bit more about that. You just bounced off of it.
For sure, for sure. Guaranteed annual income policy actually was piloted in Canada, in Manitoba in the 1970s for about 5-6 years. Our federal government partnered with the provincial and the local municipal government and gave everyone a guaranteed income. And then they assessed the impact on incentive to work, because that's obviously one of the biggest concerns that come with it. And I think this research really challenges in terms of their expressed need for self-realization and the need to engage in meaningful work and activities that give back to their communities. But that research also looked at the impact on mental health and hospitalization rates. And two of the main findings from that research was that it didn't affect incentive to work. People still continued to work, and except for two groups: women who stayed home with children longer and youth who stayed in school longer. So it has implications in terms of supporting young people's need for learning. And so that was done at that point. In Ontario right now, in BC, or in Canada, they are talking about another pilot. In Finland, Switzerland, and the Netherlands, they're looking also at exploring it there. I'm actually currently working with one of my students to write a blog, and we're looking at what it is, the benefits and challenges of it, where it's being discussed. And something that I've been following up with on this research is working on a blog to share these findings in a lay way with young people, and then also to share with them and educate them about broader alternative economic policies that we might be considering, and getting their feedback and engaging them in that kind of dialogue to think about what kinds of alternative economic policies we should be looking at advocating for. Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. You said something about Hegelian Marxist perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I want you to explain more, and I want to say so we must have an anti-capitalist perspective in order to achieve things. What do you think?
Mm-hmm. Say that again. You're wanting me to share. I'm happy to share a bit about the Hegelian Marxist historical dialectical approach that I used. And then, what was the part about anti-capitalist?
We ought to be anti-capitalist, or no?
Okay. So first of all, I really appreciate this question. I did not draw on Marx's theorizing at all in this work. What I drew on was his methodology and approach to doing inquiry, and his approach. There's a body of scholarship that has looked at how Marx sought to understand and critically analyze the transition from a capitalist, from a feudal to a capitalist socioeconomic system, and then, and not that he ever predicted that we would, and prescribed how we would organize from a socialistic perspective, and that's been the work of other people. But yes, he did hold this assumption that we would eventually evolve out of a capitalist system beyond. I was not drawing on that theoretical work. I was drawing on his relational approach to inquiry. And because I wanted an approach to analyzing how broader socioeconomic dynamics impact, in this case, young people's mental health and well-being, one of the Marxist scholars that really influenced my work was David Harvey. And he does, I think, a really useful job of explaining his approach to inquiry. Bertel Ohlmann is another one that has also drawn on his Hegelian Marxist roots, his relational approach to analysis and inquiry, compared to the ways that his ideas have been taken up within quantitative research, for example. So I strove not to make this assumption that we need to move beyond capitalism, even though I've had those senses in observing the impact on children's lives in my work as a child youth mental health nurse. But in reading through the transcripts, and I read through them several times, initially in my initial data analysis, I probably was imposing too much of some of David Harvey's analytic work, and my supervisory committee rightfully encouraged me to go back and read through and try to let go of the theory and read the transcripts for looking at the common themes. And I really was struck with their attention, these young people's descriptions of the ways that wealth-oriented, individualistic socioeconomic processes were harming their mental health, and not only challenging them and enabling their needs, but preventing them from being able to engage in broader socioeconomic life, political economic change, to change these dynamics that are powerfully influencing their mental health. Does that help? So one of the conclusions that I am making from this research is that the cultural and material aspects of capitalist socioeconomic processes are harmful to young people's mental health and well-being, and I think we need to be doing more research around comparing and contrasting these current dynamics that young people are being exposed to alternative models.
The one theoretician who influenced you is David Harvey, yes?
One of a few, yes.
And the other?
Bertel Ullman has also written about his work. Oh, here's the blog, actually, I've been working on. Bertel Ullman, there are several others. And actually, her name is escaping me now. Hill is her last name, from Australia. Actually, she did a really useful analysis in a paper contrasting Hegel and Marx's approach to inquiry. And I'm happy to share those references with you. It's in the 3rd chapter, too, of the dissertation as well, where I go into that literature and share the background and how various folks have tried to translate his approach to inquiry, which he didn't do explicitly. So they're drawing on his work in Das Kapital 1, 2, and 3, and his work, the philosophic manuscripts, and looking at how he came at his analytic work and his inquiry to analyze these broader socioeconomic dynamics. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Okay, thank you.